I'm talking about the Rebbe's mother. She passed away about a year before I was born. I was born in Elul, and she passed away Tishrei before. Everything I tell you about Rebbetzin Chana, I read or I heard, because I never saw her. I'm going to begin with sort of just a statement, a fact. The Rebbetzin Chana was a very, very important part of Lubavitch in America. You could even say she was a very, very important part of Crown Heights. And her loss, which is it's almost 60 years ago, right? This is the 59th yard site. This is the 59th yard site. In many, many ways was the absence of the Rebbe's mother had an incredible impact on the community of Lubavitch and in a bigger way in the community of Crown Heights. You must understand, in the late 50s and early 60s, mid 50s, early 60s, Crown Heights was full of Jews, full, from Yidden, from Rochester Park till the Prospect Park, way past Eastern Parkway. I read someplace there were 250,000 Jews living in Crown Heights. 250,000. How many Jews in Crown Heights today? 15% of that. The Rebbetzin Chana lived in Crown Heights. She was a presence here. She went to shul, in contrast to the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, and she socialized. She wanted to know everybody and everything, not just about Lubavitchers. She was an elderly woman. She passed away about 85 years old. She had an assistant, an aide, when she got a little older. She would sit with her beach chair or whoever it was on the President in Kingston and just say hello to people. She was a very, very real presence in Crown Heights, in the smaller world of Lubavitch and in the bigger world of Crown Heights. She brought something out of the Rebbe that when she passed away, we didn't see in the Rebbe anymore. And she was in her way, sort of like an element that made the Rebbe, our Rebbe, I'm not going to say more human, but we felt the Rebbe's humanity more because of her. And remember, she passed away before I was born. So I'm simply describing what I heard. She writes in her journal, the Rebbe's mother writes in her journal, which she kept till the day she passed away, and the journal's been published. It's got to be translated into English. Much of it is. Ein B'Yisrael, Mother in Israel, is her journal. But they've since found entries into her journal literally until less than a year before she passed away. And what she writes over and over again is that I'm very lonely. I have nobody to talk to. Nobody understands me. There's only one person in the world who truly understands me. But I cannot burden him because he's carrying the burden of the world on his shoulders. He was talking about the Rebbe. The Rebbe's mother writes that. And when you read that in her journal, it really hurts you. And you say, well, why? Why was she so lonely? The Rebbe's Chaim Mushka was lonely. She locked herself in her house. You never saw her. The Rebbe's mother went to shul. If she saw a new face, she walked over to you. She shook your hand and said, what is your name and where are you from? And then she knew right away your grandfather, your great-grandfather, you know how it was. She wanted to know everybody. She was very, very warm, very friendly, and she was very lonely. Nobody understood her. I once asked a Yid who knew her as a child, why does the Rebbetzin Chana describe herself as being so alone when she was so precocious, so social, part of the scene? And this person said to me, maybe because she was so intelligent. The Rebbetzin Chana was big melamedes. She grew up in an age where girls didn't go to cheder. Girls didn't learn anything. And she had sisters. You know, that she had a sister married to Rebbe Leivik's brother. You know, the two brothers married two sisters. The Rebbe's uncle, Rebbe had an uncle named Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Leivik's younger brother, and he was married to Rebbetzin Chana's younger sister, I think. Rebbetzin Chana was unusual. She was extraordinarily intelligent. She probably read in many languages. She knew a lot of Torah. She knew an enormous amount of Torah and lahavdil other stuff. And this is what this person, perhaps in that time, she had nobody she could converse with. She didn't find camaraderie. As much as she was involved in our community, she didn't find camaraderie. So that's from her angle, right? Now there's a shvur. This is a Torah Sheba'al Peh. This I didn't see, but I heard. Somebody said to me once that the Rebbe commented when his mother passed. I had one good friend and I lost her. About his mother. I had one person I could confide in, one confidant. The Rebbe, as you know, would go see his mother every single day, 7 days a week. He went to see his mother. The kibbud of aim that the Rebbe showed to his mother in America was really out of this world. And there was a bond between the Rebbe and his mother that went both ways, that was very deep and was very, very beautiful to watch. It was very, very, very beautiful to watch how the Rebbetzin prided herself in her son and how the Rebbe revered and honored his mother. And the old Crown Heitzers, people older than myself, remember the Rebbe going up Kingston Avenue every single day to go see his mother, going into the house and coming out of the house. All the shopkeepers on Kingston, between Eastern Parker and President, would stand at the door of their shops at 6 o'clock, and the Rebbe would walk by every day and acknowledge each one of them as he went to see his mother. And it was a part of Crown Heights, it was part of Lubavitch. And when the Rebbe's mother passed away, that stopped. That feeling, that sense of the Rebbe's family, in a weird kind of way, that it was like everybody else. He also has a mother, and he goes to see his mother. That ended. And again, I wasn't even born, but people say that Lubavitch was different when she was alive. The Rebbe mourned the loss of his mother unbelievably. He was an oval for a year, and the sadness by the Rebbe was very overt. People say that the difference between the Rebbe's mother and the Rebbetzin Chayamushka was that when the Rebbe lost his mother, on the outside he was very, very sad, but the long-term effects of it were less. When the Rebbe lost the Rebbetzin Chayamushka, the Rebbe didn't show any aveilus. But the loss of the Rebbetzin you saw more deeply, in a lasting way on the Rebbe. That's what people have said. So today's her yahrzeit. Vav Tisha is her yahrzeit. The Rebbetzin Chana was a very big miyucheses. Her great-grandfather was a yid by the name of Rabbi David Lavut. Rabbi David Lavut was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. He lived long enough to be a chassid also not only of the Rebbe Marash, but of the Rebbe Rashab. Rabbi Lavut was a Goan Oilam, was an incredible genius, incredible Talmud Chacham. He wrote a number of Sfarim that are extraordinary. There's a sefer that he made, which I can't imagine how a human being can make it without a computer. It's called Beis Aaron V'Hisofis. He made it himself, without any help of machines. Beis Aaron V'Hisofis means he goes through every single pasuk in the entire Tanakh, and he finds you every single source in Gemara, in Medrash, and in Zohar, but that was made before him. Somebody made the Beis Aaron before him, bringing the source in Gemara and Medrash, but he adds scores of Sfarim, from Rishonim and Achronim, the Ramban, I don't know, he brings a bunch of Chassidish Sfarim. The Bekiyas this man had, the kind of knowledge he had, and his ability to recall it. He goes to every single pasuk in Tanakh, and literally on every pasuk in Tanakh, he can have a paragraph at 40 or 50 Maramakayimis from all kinds of Sfarim, beginning with the Chazal. It's, if anybody wants to prepare a Shir, that's a home run. You have the Beis Aaron stuff, you don't need anything else. You have to just buy the books that he refers to. Shalah, Kisvei Arizal. It's amazing how much this man knew and how easy he was able to recall it. And he made basically an index of mefarshim on every pasuk in Tanakh, from Bereshis till Malachi, and every single quote, every single time that pasuk is quoted in maybe, 100 Sfarim. It's an extraordinary piece of work. But he's most famous for his Siddur. The Rebbe's great-grandfather, Avraham David Lavut, printed a Lubavitcher Siddur. The Lubavitcher Siddur was made by the Alter Rebbe, as you know. Alter Rebbe wrote a Nusach. Avraham David Lavut was a big chassid and a very big Talmud Chacham, and he made a Siddur which is called Siddur Torah Oyer. The Siddur Torah Oyer is also called Shar HaKoilel. There comes along with a sefer called Shar HaKoilel. In this Siddur, Rabbi Avraham David Lavut, first of all, he organizes the prayers in a way that you don't have to turn pages. You know, the old Siddurim, you had one Shemon Esrei, you had to turn pages. When I was a kid growing up, Shabbos, for Moedim, for Itzei and Moedim and Valkulam and Chol Chaim and Sim Shalom, you had to go to the weekday. They wanted to save paper. He made a Siddur where everything is printed in the right place. He had it, the case Hatei, he had it for Shidin Azach. And he made a sefer Shar HaKoilel. He was the first person to study the Alter Rebbe's Nusach and to explain the nuances in the Alter Rebbe's Nusach. I had a teacher, Zol Gezun Zayin, who told me that he remembers that if Fabrengen, the Rebbe raised a certain question in Siddur, and he said, here I'm disagreeing with my grandfather. because his Elter Zeder, Avraham David Lavut, wrote in his Siddur an explanation for something that the Alter Rebbe wrote, and the Rebbe said, I disagree with him, I have a different reason. He made a very, very important sefer on the Alter Rebbe's Nusach. Today there's quite a few from the Alter Rebbe's Nusach, but he was the first, called Shara Koil and Siddur Torah. He was Meidach Yomim, Rav Amda was Meidach Yomim. I don't know the specifics, but when he passed away, he left in his tzavah that his Rabbonis should be left for his grandson. His grandson was Rebbe Chana's father. His name was Rebbe Shloima, I think they were Leviim Yanovsky. In other words, Rebbe Avraham David Lavutz, it was either his daughter's husband or his son's daughter's husband. I think it was his daughter's husband. You can look these details up, I don't know. When he passed away, there was none of his sons available or qualified to be Rav, and he asked that his Rabbonos should be given to his grandson, Rebbe Meir Shlomo Yanovsky, who was Rebbetzin Chana's mother. He was a Rav in a city called Nikolaev, which is a history unto itself. Rebbetzin Chana was born in Nikolaev, she grew up in Nikolaev, she got married in Nikolaev. The Rebbe was born in Nikolaev. Nikolaev is in the Ukraine. Nikolaev was in a region where the Middle Rebbe got from the Russian government a huge plot of land, into Kherson it was called, to give Chassidim Parnosa, being farmers. And the Middle Rebbe, a long time ago, almost 200 years ago, relocated 2,000 mishpachas of Chassidim to the Kherson, and he sent them a Rav. Nikolaev is the big city which is right near the colonies of the Kherson, as they were called, and the Nikolaev Rav was always a Lubavitcher Chassid. Rabbi Avraham David Lavut, the Rebbe's great-grandfather, was the Nikolaev Rav. When he passed away, Rebbe Meir Shlomo, the Rebbe's Chana's father, succeeded him as the Rebbe of Nikolaev. She grew up in the house of a Rav. She grew up in a very important house. Her father was a powerful man, a big Talmud Chacham, and a big Chassid. As far as I know, her shidduch was made by the Rebbe Rashab himself. The Rebbe Rashab proposed Reb Leivik, or as Chassidim used to call him, Leivik, for the Rebbetzin Chana. They got married. I think the Reb Leivik was born Reish Lamed Ches. I don't know when she was born, Tav Reish Mem. They got married a little bit after the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker got married at 17, they got married a little later. Reb Leivik was 2 years older than the Frierdiker Rebbe. I think he was 20 when he got married in Tav Reish Nun Ches. When they got married, as was the custom in those days, they moved into her parents' home. Reb Leivik and Rebbetzin Chana got married. They didn't get an apartment with furniture and whatever it was. They got a room in the Yanovsky household. That's how it was. Girls got married young. The mothers helped raise their oldest children. The Rebbe's parents moved into the Rebbe's maternal Baba and Zayda's house, and that's where all the 3 boys were born. They lived in Nikolaev for about 10 years. The Rebbetzin Chana and her husband, Reb Leivik, lived in Nikolaev for about 10 years, and during those 10 years, the Rebbe was born in Samach Beis, which is 4 years after their wedding, and then Berel was born, I think, 2 years after that, and Label was born either Samach Vav or Samach Zayin, 2 or 3. All 3 boys were born in Nikolaev. When they were living in Nikolaev, Reb Leivik was Reb Leivik. He learned and davened and served the Eibishter. There was no world. Nikolaev Yidden knew that Reb Leivik was a Gaon Olam, was a Eloi, was a special person. And of course, what made him unusual, even amongst Chassidim, was he was a very, very big Makubal. And he did a lot of things like Kabbalah. And he didn't at all interfere, from what I understand, in the Nikolaev community. Maybe he spoke about a Fabrengen, I don't know. But people watched him. The Rebbe's father Leivik, or Reb Leivik, was inspirational enough simply by observing him. And the first 10 years of their marriage, which were probably beautiful years in every way, the Rebbe Leivik sat and learned in daven day and night. And they had their 3 boys, and the Rebbe Chana was living with her family. It was a very Gishmak 11. When the Rebbe left Nikolaev, he was 7. The Rebbe had childhood friend from Nikolaev, who later became his Chassidim. And the rumors are that when the Altois Mishpacha, when Nikolaev, the Charatonov Mishpacha, the Korf Mishpacha, when Nikolaev, and when the Altaises came to the Rebbe pushed and embraced them like childhood friends. That's the Shmua. And he had very, very fond memories. Nikolaev was a beautiful living. It was a big city. Nikolaev is not a shtetl, but it was a very, very, very chassidish shtetl. About 10 years into their marriage, a little bit longer, the Rebbe Rashab got him a job. Oh yeah, brach. He would have been better off without the job. The Rabbonos that Reb Leivik was given, which he served for 30 years, was one of the most complicated rabbanos you could give a person before this bullshit, just by itself. Why? Because the Dnepropetrovsk, which in those days was called Yekaterinslav, was a big city with tens of thousands of Jews. In Russia, there were not many large cities with big Jewish populations, because there was something called the Pale of Settlements. Yidden couldn't live in big cities. They were not allowed by the government. Yekaterinslav, the Dnepropetrovsk, was an exception because it was a rich Jew who made fake businesses that didn't exist, and he hired hundreds of Yidden to come work in his businesses, but they really weren't. And then those Jews, once they were settled in the Dnepropetrovsk, their children grew up there. When Rabbi Levi became the Rav in Yekaterinslav, there were tens of thousands of Yidden living, but they didn't see eye to eye. There were 20 factions. Amongst the Frume, you had the more Frum and the less Frum. Amongst the Frume, you had Chassidim and Misnagdim. Amongst the Chassidim, you had this kind of Chassid, that kind of Chassid, and a Chassid. Everybody's right and everybody else is wrong, naturally. Mistam amongst the Misnagdim, there's more than one type of Misnagid also. And then you had Nebuch Dinish Frume. The Zionists and the Yiddishists and the anarchists and the I don't know whatists. And everybody was vying for control of the city. And you must understand that under the Tsar, a Rav was an agent of the state. Under the Tsar, the Rav, I think he was paid by the government. And if he was paid by the community, the government oversaw it. So if you were the Rav of the city, you had real power. Now if you were a secular Jew and the Rav was particularly frum, the Rav's power would force you to live a more Yiddish life than you wanted to live. Or he would curtail, he would offset your ability, whatever it was. So becoming a Rav under the Tsar in Russia, it was a real powerful position. Rabbanim had real power. But they had to deal with the politics, with the pressures that came along, with everybody trying to pull them in a different direction. When the Rebbe's parents moved to Yekaterinslav, the Rebbe's father was probably 30 or 31 let's say, and the Rebbe's mother was probably 29. They were not old people, they were young, l'fiyerach. But both of them were incredibly prepared, qualified for their respective roles. First of all, Rabbi Levi was brilliant. He was brilliant, and he just knew how to speak to every person. He was also very personable. The Rabbi Levi, the Rebbe's father, could sit with a Gaon and an Amoritz and a Chassid and a Misnagid and an Apokadis, one after the other, and everyone felt like he understood him. He had that skill. Rebbetzin Chana was extraordinary in that way. Rebbetzin Chana, everybody who knew her says that she was extremely qualified, capable of making people comfortable around her. And when they came to the city, there was a huge fight. There was a huge fight over this Rabbanis. So many people did not want a Frumirov, let alone a Lubavitcherov. The Rebbe Rashab fought Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe Rashab said the love of the Dnepropetrovsk is always a Lubavitcher. It's going to continue being a Lubavitcher. And by the way, today, in 2023, the Yekaterinslav is also a Lubavitcher. The Rebbe wrote to the Shliach Kamenetsky, Iri, my city, the Dnepropetrovsk belongs to the Rebbe, and it's dominated by Lubavitch. And the Rebbe Rashab got the Leivik the job. So he got him a job. So he had Panose, but boy was that, those few rubles that they paid him were very, very, very costly. The Rebbe's parents moved to Dnepropetrovsk, and over the course of a relatively short time, they gained people's love and respect, not necessarily approval. You maybe didn't like what he believed, but you liked him, you know. Maybe you didn't agree with how they ran the community, but you liked him and her. And this is part, I don't want you to know part of the Rebbe's personality. I don't know the Rebbe's personality. You certainly know Rebbe's, but people who were around in the earlier years, when the Rebbe, certainly before the Rebbe was Rebbe, and even after the Rebbe was Rebbe, I don't know how to say this because it's so grub. The Rebbe has amazing social skills. He knows how to talk to people. We saw him ran away. Poor guy. Literally, we saw the Rebbe ran away. But people who were not afraid of the Rebbe, in quotations, the Rebbe had his mother and his father's skill at talking to every person, eye to eye. You never felt that the Rebbe talked down to you. The simplest person and the biggest genius, you all knew that in the Rebbe's presence were all pygmies. The Rebbe had an incredible ability to include people in his world in a way that they felt very comfortable. And B'derech HaTeva and Da'as Tachtein, Both of his parents had those traits. Now, of course, life in Yekaterinslav in the beginning was beautiful. They had a huge apartment, a very large apartment. They had different bedrooms for each one of the boys. They had these 3 kids who were bookworms. They were geniuses. The Rebbetzin Chana used to say she had to fight with the kids. They should eat. They should eat. Took little children, 8, 9, 10 years old. And she wanted them to have their own space so they could do their own thing. I mean, we know some stories about the Rebbe and and his brothers going to Cheder, the Rebbe and his brothers having a Malamed, but they did a lot of learning on their own. I mean, the Rebbetzin Chana, most of the stories we know about the Rebbe's childhood are A, true, and B, the reason they're true, we know them is because the Rebbe's mother told them over. The boys had a competition in the house to learn new languages. And they would learn a language from a dictionary, which not how to read it, how to speak it. Which means, you know, you look in the English dictionary, there's comments, patach, tzedei, segel, shvachel, kubet, shulik, melupim. You know what I'm talking about? In an English dictionary, there are these funny signals that mean how you're supposed to, but we don't even know what those things are, yeah? The Rebbe and his brothers, using Russian translated dictionary languages, had a competition how fast they could learn a language. They only learned the languages in the bathroom. And on average, it took them 3 weeks to learn a new language. Smart guys, what do you think? The 3 of them. Did I breathe it? This was the house. It was a house full of brains. The house could have exploded. This was the good years in Midrash. Now, in the earlier years, there was more than one Rav, and there was competition. A Chassidish Rav, a Litvish Rav. The Rav passed away, but then the Tzaddik started. Right, the revolution was the end of 1917. Yekaterinslav is near the bottom, it's in the Ukraine, so the revolution reached there in the early 20s. They took away half their apartment. They cut the apartment in half. And they made their lives very, very uncomfortable. And the Rebbe's parents now became the de facto leaders of the Jewish people of all of the Ukraine. When the Frierdiker Rebbe lived in Russia, Rebbe Leivik was in the Ukraine, and the Rebbe Leivik was not a Rebbe, he was a Chassid, but Rebbe Leivik really was the unofficial Rav Russia of the Ukraine, and he stood like a rock against the Soviets, like a rock. For principle, he fought for all kinds of issues and values, and the Rebbe's mother supported him. Their life became very, very difficult, and they became difficult personally. I'm sure it became difficult materially. It certainly became difficult because of the constant fear. And it also became difficult because there were so many needy people. So many people needed so many things. And the Rebbe's parents tried to help people as best as they could. The Rebbe told a story by Fabrengen that at the end of the First World War, tens of thousands of immigrants came to the city. Tens of thousands of immigrants. They were running away from the front. I don't understand why, but it was the end of the war. The war ended in 1918. The immigrants didn't arrive in 1914, 15 when the war started. They arrived in 1918. And some of them would stay into the early 1920s. Peilish Yidden. And the Rebbe said, I never saw my father like this, my mother like this, before or after. She became the leader of a huge organization that had many subcommittees that provided every immigrant, all of them, room, board, clothing, education for children were needed, medical requirements, and it was all done b'chavod. The people who came into the city, who were dependent, felt treated with respect. And the Rebbe says, my mother was the head of the committee of all the committees. She oversaw the provisions for all these towns of thousands of people. I never saw my mother acting in such a big leadership role as I saw during those few years. We know from non-frum sources that people describe their being immigrants in Yekaterinslav, and what these people describe is that the Rebbe's mother and the Rebbe himself and his brothers being actively involved in helping all these immigrants. So the Rebbe's parents became Askanei Tibur. They became very, very, very much public servants, helping people. That's what they did. Now, I got to stop, but I just want to sort of finish on a different note. The Rebbe's father was the Rav. And he did not double duty, he did 10 times duty. He was the Rebbe of the community, he worried about all the needs of the community, he paskin shaylis, but he also was a chassid. So there was the Chassidische Yekaterinslav, the Lubavitchers, Befrat, and the Chassidim, Bechlal, and he would make fabrengens, and he used to kiss of gatherings, and there was a duality to the Rabbanis. He was leading the community. The rumor is, and I think it's more than a rumor, the Yekaterinslav have many shuls. The Leivik David in the biggest city, and the biggest shul in the Yekaterinslav, it wasn't a Lubavitch shul, it was an Ashkenaz shul. There are people say that the Rebbe would do things during davening, which are not minhag Chabad, that you could see, that were from his childhood. The Rebbe grew up, the Rebbe davened in an Ashkenaz shul, and in Ashkenaz shul, at the end of Yahalelu, you sing a whole paragraph, before you put the Sefer Torah back in Musaf. You can watch the videos. The Rebbe is not just saying, he's singing a whole song. The Rebbe would repeat what he did as a young man when he davened in a non-Lubavitcher shul in the Yekaterinslav. The shul where the Rebbe's father was Rav had a chazan and a choir, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you understand? And again, I heard this from somebody, I'm reliable, is that the Rebbe and his father and his brothers would discuss the quality of the chazanas, the quality of the choir. We have a record of a man whose name was Yeshaya Shor, who was 14 years old, and he was in the choir in the shul where the Rebbe's father would daven as Rav, and he had a beautiful voice, and apparently he had a solo, and the Rebbe's brother Label liked him so much because of his singing, they became personal friends, and they remained friends for the rest of their lives. So you have to try to imagine this Rabbanis in a very realistic and a very, very down-to-earth way. I need to stop now. I will continue this with the seminary Aleph. If anybody wants a second recording, ask me.